Welcome back, everyone, to Tell Your Story Alaska as we continue to get to know our state one village at a time. We're going to do 2 more villages today. And just as a kind of nice, refreshing note, looks like we're going to have an early spring this year. At least where I live, the snow is pretty much all gone. Of course, that's not everywhere. Still a lot of snow up further north, but where I am, it's snowless and the weather is warming up. We've been like kind of teased with this early spring for a while, and then we get a couple inches of snow, then the snow melts. So we're kind of like getting teased here, but either way, it's still quite a bit early for a snowless time here in mid-April. Usually it's not this warm. It's just been really dry and a warmer winter. I've used a lot less firewood, but anyway, I kind of digress, but it is kind of exciting to have a little bit more of a spring, a little bit longer spring, but that might mean a dry summer, and dry summers mean lots of wildfires, and lots of wildfires means smoke. And of course, for flying, that is not good. So anyway, we will see what happens. But either way, I'm looking outside right now and it's sunny. I'm hearing birds chirp, and it feels more like May than April, but it's April. So anyway, that's kind of what's going on here. But we are going to tackle 2 villages today. And the 2 of a sort of trifecta of villages, which is one we did last week, which was Chignik, Alaska. And this week we'll be doing Chignik Lagoon and Chignik Lake. So I'm calling them like the trifecta of villages. They all bear the name Chignik. But these 3 villages are really close to one another. They're in the same area out in western Alaska, kind of where the Aleutian chain starts jetting out into the Bering Sea. But it's not really where it starts breaking them to islands. It's before that. On the south side of the peninsula lies this trifecta of villages. So we're going to look into these 3. They really are interconnected, and we'll get into that a little bit. I think it'll be a shorter episode today. Not as much content to go through. A lot of it's because we already covered Chignik, Alaska, and because these villages are so connected to one another, I don't really want to repeat much, but here we go. We're going to dive in. Chignik Lagoon. Now, the word Chignik is the Aleut word for wind, or another source said big wind. So we presume that this place has been considered a pretty windy place. I'm not really sure, but given its location, I'm guessing it's pretty windy. Chignik Lagoon rests just 1.5 miles from Chignik, which we covered last week. And this region was originally occupied by here's one of those hard words to pronounce, but I think we did talk about this last week, the Kanaigmuit Eskimos. But when the Russians arrived, the Russians began to intermarry with the Eskimos there. And it created a mix of not only a physical mix, but also a cultural mix. And they became known as the Koniags. Excuse me. And so in those early years, the Koniags were reliant on living on the sea. They hunted sea otters, sea lions, porpoise, and whales. However, when the Russians came, they also brought with them disease. And it's estimated that the diseases and the decimation of the sea otter population led to the native population to be cut in half. So a lot of things going on there. Some diseases, decline in one of their sources of food in sea otters because of the Russian fur trade, but also a cultural and physical mixing of peoples that happened there, and that those folks are who still live there today. Now, around 20 years after the U.S. purchased Alaska from Russia, salmon canning became a big industry in Chignik Lagoon. Today, that canning industry is gone. It's still over in Chignik with the Trident factory over there, but it looks like The canning industry for Chignik Lagoon is no longer there, but commercial fishing is still very prominent in Chignik Lagoon. They catch Pacific cod, halibut, and salmon. Census data takes us back to 1960, so not too long ago. They recorded 108 people back then, and today Chignik Lagoon is home to 72 residents as of the 2020 census, 5 years ago. The vast majority of the residents are native Alaskans. Now, curiously, Chignik Lagoon does not show up in the 1970 census, so it's 1960, and it skips the 70, and it goes straight to the 80. And also, if you go way back to the 1890 and 1910 census, it looks like Chignik Lagoon was included with a community called Chignik Bay in its population count. So it looks like for Chignik Lagoon as a community, it took a while for it to be considered its own distinct village, which it is now. Now, as far as I can tell, there is no church in Chignik Lagoon for the 72 residents there. However, there is a small school there. There is a proposal that I found to connect these three, the trifecta. There's a proposal that looks like it was initially made back in 1997 to build a road to connect the three villages. But it's pretty clear looking at Google Earth, that road has not been built. So these are kind of three unconnected villages that bear the same name and are pretty close to one another. But of course, you could still take a plane or a boat to get there. But it looks like this road proposal has just never happened for whatever reason. Funding, probably, bureaucracy, I don't know. But it looks like they have been trying to build a road between the three. I found an interesting document of an archaeological field study of the area around the Chignik trifecta villages. And according to this document, they found 21 archaeological sites. Most of these sites seem to be places where they found, quote, cultural material and flakes, which I believe, based on some of the pictures in the document, that there are rocks, I forget what the name of the type of rock, but you can like chip it and make like an arrowhead with it or a cutting tool. So they've been finding these rocks that have been molded into tools in that area on 21 different sites. Sometimes they find what they're calling charcoal fragments. And from these, they get some interesting radiometric dates from them to try to date when people lived there. They found a handful of single room structure remains. So it sounds like they use a helicopter and they do some kind of reading from the helicopter, and they are able to see depressions in the ground where they think there's some ancient structure there. So they, in some places, they mention 10 structures, and other places they mention like 20 or 30 structures in an area. So it looks like in the past there were just little communities here and there, and some of the remains are still there. So sometimes I really wish I just had like, maybe I need to do it, like go on a vacation and print out these documents, because I love this stuff. I love archaeology and ancient history. I'm so curious about the history of Native Americans. I'd love to deep dive this someday, but maybe when I'm retired and an empty nester. I mean, life just happens, so there's so much going on. But sometimes I wish I can lay around and read this stuff. But anyway, the thought of people just kind of living here long ago, and all that we see remaining is just some tool fragments, maybe some structural remains. It just kind of instills wonder in me, and it sparks my curiosity about the story of people who just lived in these lands that were unknown to, Europeans until very recent history. And so I'm so curious about, their story. Where did they come from? Their history, their religion, their thoughts about their own origins, or about the spirit world, or about God. These were people who probably thought deeply about these things. And it just kind of stirs my curiosity. So anyway, I love learning about some of these archaeological stuff. And that's why I'm excited about this book coming out soon called They Had Names by Nathaniel Jeanson. I've mentioned him before, but his book is going to be on exactly this thing that I'm curious about. So That book will come out soon. And then make sure you check that out. Let's see. The runway in Chignik Lagoon is a dirt runway. And it looks like it kind of cuts right through the middle of town. Kind of reminds me of it's a runway in a village in Mexico I flew in once. And it's like the runway is like the main road through the town. And I don't think this is like a road for the town, but it does kind of cut right through the middle of the village. So you can imagine, houses on either end of it. And you got to watch out if you're a pilot and you're landing, you got to watch out for, people zipping across the runway. Sometimes pilots will like make their airplane make a noise. They'll rev up the engine or something like that so people look up and then they see that our plane's coming. And I've heard some stories about people having tricks getting the airplane to make noise, so they you don't just come in powered back. You got to make some noise so people know you're coming. Oh man, I'm so easily distracted. I just kind of talk about different things. And I'm going to try to keep this one shorter. We're only going to go a few more minutes. The runway is labeled as fair gravel, which tells me it might be a bit of a rough runway, but it's plenty long, 2,200 feet for landing there. Now, okay, Chignik Lake. Let's go to Chignik Lake, a village just across the way, not too far away. It's named after the lake on which it sits, Chignik Lake. It was established as a village in the 1950s, so not that long ago, when a school was built there. And people moved there from other villages and became a community. So it's not even that old, 1950s, which is a pretty consistent theme. Is a lot of these established villages, you get like this idea of ancient remains, but a very recent history of where it is today. This seems to be a very common pattern I'm seeing with these village studies. It does seem like, if you build a school somewhere, it kind of makes it a place where people kind of congregate around the school so they can educate their kids. And that is how a lot of these villages came to be. Chignik Lake's census goes back to 1960. In 1960, recorded 107 residents. The 2020 census records 61 residents, so a huge decline there. St. Nicholas Church resides in Chignik Lake, which, as far as I can tell, kind of serves as the Orthodox Church for all three of the trifecta villages, the three Chignik villages. Looks like this St. Nicholas Church is kind of considered the church for the three villages, even though they don't have a road between them. The church bears the name St. Nicholas, which is based on St. Nicholas of Myra. And Myra is a place in Turkey. St. Nicholas lived from 270 to 343 AD. And he was known as Nicholas the Wonder Worker because of the many miracles attributed to him. He was also known as the protector of the innocent and poor, as he would secretly pay dowries to save girls from slavery. St. Nicholas participated in the First Council of Nicaea, a very important council as far as the history of the Christian church. And so he was one of the guys that participated in the First Council of Nicaea, which was 325 AD. And during this council, he was said to have punched a guy for denying Christ's divinity. Kind of got a cool factor there. He's considered one of the most popular saints, with countless churches named after him. And of course, here is one of the many churches named after him there in Chignik Lake. He's also one of the people in real life for the myth of Santa Claus, who is often called Saint Nick. And it's fun, around Christmas time with my own kids, my wife and I have discussed what do we do with Santa Claus. And for us, we tell our kids that Santa Claus was a real man. His name was Saint Nicholas, who I just described. And he really did love Jesus, and he loved children, and he protected girls from slavery. But now who we call Santa Claus is just for fun and it's pretend, but he's based off of a real person. And yeah, we do pretend Santa Claus lives at the North Pole. And so our kids know that it's pretend, but they do play along and we have a lot of fun with Santa Claus. And we do use it to kind of bounce off this idea of who the actual guy was, which was Saint Nicholas. And so that's a little bunny trail there, but That's St. Nicholas Orthodox Church in Chignik Lake. And I just kind of enjoyed going down that bunny trail a little bit. Now, I was not able to find any other churches in Chignik Lake, but it doesn't mean there aren't any like home churches meeting. It is true that in a handful of villages, there's not like a named church that you'll find, through Google searching, but there might be home churches that meet. And it's kind of the case with Alaskan villages is, my mind just went blank. With these Alaska villages is like, that there might be a believer or two here and there, but they don't really have a church gathering. This is pretty common in Alaska. And so I don't know if that's the case here in Chignik Lake. I just thought I'd bring up the topic. But, as a Protestant myself, it does bring up that question, of so many of these villages have Orthodox churches. Like the last several villages we've studied have Orthodox churches and no Protestant church presence. So it does kind of, ask the question, as a Protestant, should I be content with the fact that there's an Orthodox church there? What is the Orthodox understanding of salvation? Or do I feel a need for, the biblical gospel to be presented there? Do the Orthodox churches present a biblical gospel, or do they rely too much on tradition with other doctrinal issues? So it's a good question to ask. I know a lot of people would have strong opinions about it, but I try to be childlike in my faith and my question asking, and I am curious to sort that out. What do I think about a village that only has an Orthodox church, whereas a Protestant, I have I gotta be careful how I say it, but just perhaps a different view on the means of salvation, or the way we relate to God. Those things there's going to be differences. And so, yeah, wrestling with that. I do have a high appreciation for the Orthodox Church in the sense that they have a real awe and a reverence in all things that they do. And I do think this is something the Protestants need to do better at, which is to have a sense of reverence in the way they worship, in their liturgy. I think liturgy is beautiful. And I really appreciate that about the Orthodox Church. But I do think they garner too much from tradition when they should get it from Scripture instead. But I think these are really good questions to wrestle with as someone who wants to see the biblical gospel go to the villages. So just something I was thinking on as I considered, St. Nicholas and St. Nicholas Orthodox Church over there. All right. I'm going to do my best to keep this episode shorter. I am done. Next week, we will be talking about Koniags, which is a village in the northwest corner of Kodiak Island. It looks like a large area with a small population. So that'll be interesting. It looks like early explorers were poking around over there. And then Chistochina. No, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Chistochina, which is a village near Glen Allen. So we will do those two next week. Thank you guys for coming in again and getting to know our state, just one village at a time. And thanks for putting up with my all my bunny trails that I like to go down. We always use that term bunny trail in our house when we kind of start rambling about different things. But thanks for coming along for the ride. We're going to get to know our state one village at a time in this podcast. So thanks, you guys, and we'll see you next week.